cutting off the head of the snake. That is the exact phrase U.S. Central Command used to describe one of the most consequential strikes of this entire war, the moment American forces destroyed the headquarters of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It happened back on March the 2nd, 2026, just days into this conflict, and it set the tone for everything that has followed since. Iran's military brain, its command structure, its top generals, its intelligence chiefs, has been under sustained, deliberate attack from the very first hours of this war. And on this exact day, July 21st, 2026, American forces are still doing it, hitting Iranian command centers again for the 9th consecutive night in a row. Let's walk through exactly how thoroughly the United States and Israel have dismantled Iran's actual command structure, why that matters so much more than any single missile strike, and what it means that this campaign against Iran's military brain is still going, nearly 5 months after it started. Go back to the war's opening hours to understand the scale of what actually happened first. On February 28th and March 1st, 2026, in coordinated strikes, the United States and Israel didn't just hit missile sites and nuclear facilities. They specifically targeted the people running Iran's entire military and security apparatus. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader for over 3 decades, was killed. Iran's defense minister was killed. The commander-in-chief of the IRGC, Mohammad Pakpour, was killed. Ali Shamkhani, a senior advisor to the supreme leader, was killed. General Abdulrahim Mousavi and Aziz Nasirzadeh, both senior military commanders, were killed. According to reporting compiled by Iran International, 52 senior Iranian officials and commanders were killed across this initial wave and the strikes that followed in the weeks after. 52. That is not a decapitation strike against a single target. That is the systematic destruction of an entire layer of senior leadership across Iran's military, intelligence, and political command structure, all within the opening days of this war. Then, just 2 days later, came the strike CENTCOM itself chose to describe, using that exact phrase, cutting off the head of the snake. American forces confirmed the destruction of the IRGC's actual headquarters, a large-scale strike aimed directly at the physical nerve center of Iran's most powerful military organization. On the very same day, President Trump posted on Truth Social that the U.S. had destroyed and sunk 9 Iranian naval ships, some of them relatively large and important, warning that the rest of Iran's navy would soon be floating at the bottom of the sea as well. Trump also said that in a separate attack, American forces had largely destroyed Iran's naval headquarters. Israel's military added its own confirmation that same day, reporting strikes on dozens of Iranian military command centers, including IRGC facilities, intelligence headquarters, IRGC Air Force Command, centers, and internal security headquarters, all described by Israeli officials as inflicting a severe blow to Iran's command and control capabilities, specifically by eliminating personnel inside those critical facilities. Think about what that combination actually means, strategically. In the space of just a few days, Iran lost its supreme leader, its defense minister, its IRGC commander-in-chief, a senior presidential advisor, multiple top generals, its IRGC headquarters, its naval headquarters, and dozens of additional command centers spanning intelligence, air force, and internal security functions. That is not a war being fought primarily over missiles and ships in the traditional sense. That is a war whose opening phase was specifically, deliberately designed to obliterate Iran's ability to think, coordinate, and command itself as a unified military force, hence the term Iran's military brain. You can replace individual missiles. You can rebuild individual buildings. What is far harder to replace quickly is decades of institutional knowledge, chains of command, and coordination relationships built up among senior officers and officials. All of it wiped out within the same few days. The list of individual senior figures killed throughout this war tells its own story about just how deep this campaign against Iran's command structure has actually gone. Iran International's own compiled reporting includes names like Davoud Alizadeh, the senior IRGC official overseeing operations in Lebanon, and the main liaison between the IRGC and Hezbollah's new leadership, killed in a strike on a hotel in Beirut in March, alongside 2 other IRGC commanders. It includes Saleh Assadi, the head of intelligence at Iran's Qatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, the country's military emergency command structure, killed in the initial strikes on February 28th. That same reporting notes one especially telling detail. Before this war began, an Iranian official had reportedly boasted that in the event of any attack on the Islamic Republic, Iran would set American bases across the region on fire. Israel strikes during the war's opening phase, combined with subsequent American and Israeli strikes throughout March, proved that assessment badly wrong, systematically dismantling the very command structure that both depended on. It's worth understanding why targeting command structure specifically, rather than just weapons and equipment, represents such a different and more effective kind of military campaign. A military is not just its hardware. It is the network of officers, communication channels, and decision-making authority that actually directs that hardware toward specific objectives. Destroy enough missiles and an adversary can still, in theory, replace them over time, assuming its factories and supply chains remain intact. But destroy the senior officers who know how to coordinate a missile campaign, the intelligence chiefs who know where the remaining assets are hidden, and the headquarters buildings where all of that coordination physically happens. And you don't just weaken the military, you fundamentally degrade its ability to function as a coherent, coordinated force at all. That is precisely what CENTCOM meant by cutting off the head of the snake. A snake without its head cannot coordinate its body, no matter how much of that body technically remains intact. Now, let's bring this forward to right now, because this campaign against Iran's command structure never actually stopped. It just evolved. CENTCOM confirmed it completed a 9th consecutive night of strikes against Iran at 2 in the morning GMT this past Monday, and its own public statement was explicit about the target set: Iranian military command centers, air defense and coastal surveillance sites, maritime capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and communications networks. Command centers and communications networks listed right at the top of that target category, nearly 5 months after the war's opening. Decapitation strikes. That tells you this is not a closed chapter of the war. It is an ongoing, sustained effort to keep whatever command structure Iran has managed to rebuild since March permanently degraded and disorganized, preventing Tehran from ever fully reconstituting the kind of coordinated military brain it had before this war began. This latest round of strikes came in direct response to fresh American casualties, and it's worth being precise about the sequence, because it shows exactly how this command structure targeting connects to real, immediate events on the ground. 2 American service members were killed in an Iranian ballistic missile attack on Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan on Friday, July 17th, an attack that struck prefabricated housing units according to U.S. officials, part of what turned out to be 3 separate missile strikes on that same base within a 24-hour window. That brought the total number of American service members killed since this war began in February up to 16. Then, just a day or two later, CENTCOM announced that a U.S. soldier had died in northern Iraq during a controlled detonation of unexploded ordnance from a downed Iranian drone, pushing the total toward 18 once the missing service member from the Jordan attack was later confirmed dead as well. His remains recovered by U.S. forces, according to Central Command. Every one of those deaths triggered another wave of American strikes, specifically targeting the same category of infrastructure: Iranian command centers, coordination networks, and the surveillance and communication systems that let Iran keep directing its forces across multiple countries at once. The Pentagon's own broader casualty figures paint a fuller, sobering picture of just how costly this specific phase of fighting has become. Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell said nearly 100 U.S. troops have been injured in the war with Iran over just the past 2 weeks alone, though he added that the vast majority of those injuries were mild concussions, with 96% of the wounded already returned to duty. An online Pentagon database, which had reportedly gone stagnant for days at a time, showed 14 troops dead and 427 wounded since February when it was finally updated, figures that have clearly continued climbing in the days since given the additional deaths confirmed just this past week. Separately, according to Wikipedia's own tracking of the war's individual campaigns, Iran's strikes on Kuwait alone killed 6 American soldiers in the Port Shuaiba drone attack we've covered in earlier videos, plus 4 more service members killed and 77 wounded in that same country's broader strike campaign, while a friendly fire incident saw a Kuwaiti F-A-18 accidentally shoot down 3 American F-15Es, with all crew members surviving. Saudi Arabia's own tally shows 2 American soldiers dead and 29 wounded from Iranian strikes there. The UAE's strikes killed 3 foreign workers and injured 58 more. These are not abstract numbers scattered across a single battlefield. They represent a genuinely wide, multi-country pattern of American and Allied casualties spread across the entire structure of bases and personnel that make up the American military's regional footprint. There's also a genuinely alarming internal assessment that surfaced this week, one that adds real weight to understanding just how strained this sustained campaign has become for the American side specifically. A U.S. official told the Washington Post directly that the United States is planning for a wider war, pointing to the recent increase in American military aircraft flowing into the region. But that same official added a striking, candid warning. The expansion of U.S. operations will be limited by dwindling stockpiles of air defense and long-range munitions, along with constraints on the ability to surge more troops and aircraft into the area because of accumulated battle damage. We do not have enough to safely sustain operations, the official said bluntly, and added a genuinely concerning line that they did not believe the White House was fully aware of that shortage. That's an extraordinary thing for a U.S. official to say on the record, even anonymously, suggesting that the sustained campaign against Iran's command structure and broader military capability, however successful it has been at degrading Iran's coordination and leadership, is simultaneously straining America's own munitions, stockpiles, and operational capacity in ways that may not be fully understood at the highest levels of the American government, making decisions about how far to keep pushing this fight. Iran, for its part, has not been passive in the face of having its command structure repeatedly targeted, and its retaliation this past weekend spread impressively wide for a country that has lost so much of its senior leadership. Iran's IRGC said it targeted U.S. aircraft at Jordan's Aqaba airport with ballistic missiles, along with American military assets, and equipment at Kuwait's Al-Adiri camp and Ali al-Salam air base, plus additional targets in Syria. Jordanian air defenses intercepted 3 of the missiles aimed their way this Sunday, with a 4th landing in a remote area. Israel's own military reported identifying missile launches from Iran toward Aqaba specifically, close enough to Israeli territory, that interceptor fragments from Israel's own defensive response fell near the city of Eilat. Senior Israeli officials responded with some of their sharpest warnings of the entire war, with Defense Minister Israel Katz stating plainly that Israel will respond and strike back without any dependence or conditions if Iran attacks Israel directly, while the IDF's Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Kamer, said Israeli forces are prepared to immediately resume combat against anyone who harms the country. That kind of pointed, direct language from Israel's most senior military and defense officials tells you that even a badly degraded Iranian command structure retains enough coordinated capability to force genuine, serious concern in Jerusalem about the possibility of Israel being pulled back into direct, active combat once again. Despite everything Iran's military brain has absorbed since this war began, its diplomatic apparatus has continued signaling at least some openness to a negotiated path forward, even as the fighting continues. Esmail Baghaei, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman, said mediators had sent Tehran proposals for de-escalating the current tensions, though he declined to offer any specific details about what those proposals actually contained. The Trump administration is reportedly exploring that proposal and has urged Israel specifically to avoid any steps that could close this diplomatic window, entirely according to U.S. officials. A senior U.S. official confirmed talks are continuing on a parallel track even as the military campaign proceeds, though that same official noted Trump has not yet finished retaliating for the missile strike that killed American troops in Jordan. That combination, active diplomatic engagement running alongside a still unfinished retaliatory campaign, captures the same complicated dual-track pattern we've tracked throughout this entire war, fighting and talking happening simultaneously rather than sequentially. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's own comments this week reinforce that same dual-track reality directly from Washington's side. Rubio told reporters that the United States always remains open to a diplomatic solution, noting that multiple attempts had already been made with Iran and that Washington would keep trying, adding that if that diplomatic door opens further, the U.S. would be happy to walk through it. He said all of this on the exact same day American forces launched their 9th consecutive night of strikes specifically against Iran's remaining command centers and communications infrastructure. That juxtaposition, a top American diplomat expressing continued openness to talks, while the military simultaneously keeps hammering the very command structure that would need to exist for Iran to negotiate and enforce any eventual deal, is worth sitting with. It reflects a genuine, unresolved tension at the heart of America's current strategy. Destroy enough of Iran's military brain to force capitulation, while somehow leaving enough of a functioning government and command structure intact on the other side for a real, lasting negotiated settlement to actually be possible once the fighting stops. There's a connective thread worth pulling in here from earlier coverage in this series, because it ties directly back to just how thoroughly Iran's leadership brain was damaged in this war's opening days. We've already covered extensively how Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader appointed after his father's death in the Q. Original strikes remained entirely unseen in public for months, with even his own father-in-law admitting he had no information about his condition. That extended, unprecedented invisibility of Iran's own top leader is not a separate, unrelated story from the destruction of Iran's military command structure. It is a direct symptom of the exact same underlying problem. When you kill a supreme leader, a defense minister, an IRGC commander-in-chief, and dozens of senior officials within days of each other, the entire apparatus responsible for managing a transition of power, communicating clearly with the public, and coordinating a unified military and political response gets thrown into genuine disarray. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, himself admitted in a recent interview that he still had not personally met the country's new supreme leader nearly 5 months into this man's tenure. That is not a minor administrative gap. That is direct, high-level confirmation that even Iran's own most senior diplomats are operating without full clarity about who is actually in charge and how decisions are truly being made at the very top of the chain of command. A confusion that traces directly back to how effectively this war's opening strikes obliterated the normal functioning leadership structure Iran depended on before February 28th. The friendly fire incident in Kuwait deserves a slightly closer look too, because it illustrates another, less obvious consequence of a military campaign this intense and this focused on disrupting command and coordination. When a Kuwaiti F-A-18 mistakenly shot down 3 American F-15Es during the chaos of Iran's retaliatory strikes on Kuwait back in the war's early days, all 3 American crews survived. But the incident itself is a telling data point. Friendly fire tragedies tend to happen most often precisely when command and control, communication between allied forces, and clear coordination break down under the stress and confusion of active combat. A war being fought specifically around the goal of degrading an adversary's command structure inevitably creates enormous strain on your own side's coordination as well. Coalition partners, scrambling jets, missiles flying from multiple directions, air defenses trying to sort real threats from friendly aircraft in real time, all under the kind of pressure that makes mistakes like this one far more likely. It's a reminder that a war fought around obliterating military coordination doesn't just damage the adversary's ability to function smoothly, it puts enormous, comparable strain on your own coalition's coordination as well. It's also worth including a piece of this story that's gotten comparatively less attention, involving Iranian strikes specifically aimed at British military facilities supporting the broader American-led coalition effort. According to documented tracking of this specific campaign, Iran launched missile and drone attacks against British bases and personnel across 3 separate regions: Cyprus, the Indian Ocean, and Iraq, all specifically targeting British assets that were cooperating with American forces throughout this war. That detail matters because it shows Iran's retaliatory strikes, even while its own senior command structure has been so heavily degraded, have continued reaching well beyond just American targets, extending to any nation whose bases or personnel are seen as materially supporting the broader coalition arrayed against Tehran. Britain's involvement stemmed directly from the broader American military buildup across the Middle East throughout this conflict, which depended heavily on allied nations providing strategic basing and logistical support, exactly the kind of support network that becomes an attractive secondary target once Iran's own command structure lacks the coordinated capability to strike directly and decisively at American forces themselves. Pulling all of this together, the huge, sustained story here is not really about any single strike. Even one as dramatic as the destruction of the IRGC's own headquarters or the deaths of dozens of senior commanders in the war's opening days, it's about the sheer duration and consistency of this campaign against Iran's actual command structure, its brain, running continuously from February 28th all the way through to this 9th consecutive night of strikes happening right now in the 3rd week of July. 52 senior officials and commanders killed, an IRGC headquarters destroyed, a naval headquarters destroyed, command centers, intelligence headquarters, and communications networks still being struck nightly nearly 5 months later. And on the other side of that ledger, American casualties climbing past 18, injuries approaching 500, and a genuine internal warning from U.S. officials that the resources needed to keep sustaining this level of operation may be running dangerously thin. Iran's military brain has absorbed an extraordinary sustained pounding throughout this entire war. Whether that campaign has actually succeeded in permanently disabling Iran's ability to coordinate and command its remaining forces, or whether Tehran has simply adapted, rebuilding enough of a functioning command structure to keep firing missiles at Jordan, Kuwait, and Syria 9 months into a war meant to destroy exactly that capability, is the question this conflict's next phase will have to answer. There's also a regional dimension to Iran's command structure losses worth expanding on, because the damage wasn't confined purely to Iranian territory itself. The killing of Davoud Alizadeh in Beirut, the senior IRGC official who had been serving as the main liaison between the IRGC and Hezbollah's new Secretary General, Naim Qassem, shows that this command structure campaign extended well beyond Iran's own borders into the broader network of proxy relationships. Tehran has spent decades building across the region. Alizadeh had taken on that critical liaison role specifically after 2 previous senior IRGC officials overseeing Lebanon, Abbas Nilfroushan and Mohammad Reza Zahedi, had already been killed in earlier strikes, meaning his own death represented the 3rd time in a relatively short stretch that Iran had to replace its most senior point of contact managing the crucial relationship with Hezbollah. Losing that kind of institutional continuity repeatedly 3 different senior officials cycling through the same critical liaison role in succession, each eventually killed in turn, represents exactly the kind of cumulative damage to coordination and relationship building that a sustained campaign against military brain infrastructure is specifically designed to inflict. It's not just about destroying Iran's ability to command its own forces directly. It's about degrading the entire web of relationships and institutional knowledge that lets Iran project influence and coordinate action through allied and proxy forces scattered across multiple countries. The munitions and resource strain we touched on earlier deserves a bit more explanation too, because it represents a genuinely underappreciated risk sitting beneath the surface of this entire campaign. Modern precision strikes, the kind needed to reliably hit hardened command centers, communications networks, and specific high-value individuals, rely on a finite, expensive category of munitions that take considerable time and industrial capacity to manufacture and replace. A campaign sustained continuously for nearly 5 months, encompassing the war's original decapitation strikes in February and March, followed by renewed nightly strikes throughout this. Current July escalation draws down those stockpiles at a pace that defense planners have to track extremely carefully. The anonymous U.S. official's warning to the Washington Post that dwindling stockpiles of air defense and long-range munitions could limit how far operations can safely expand, and that the White House might not be fully aware of that constraint, points to a genuine structural risk. A military campaign built around continuously obliterating an adversary's command and control infrastructure only works if you can actually sustain that level of precision strike activity for as long as the fight requires. If munitions stockpiles run critically low before Iran's remaining command capability is fully neutralized, or before a genuine negotiated settlement is reached, American commanders could eventually face difficult choices about scaling back operations at precisely the moment when maintaining pressure might matter most. It's worth remembering, too, just how unusual it is historically for a war to sustain this specific kind of decapitation-focused campaign for such an extended period. Most conflicts that open with dramatic strikes against enemy leadership and command infrastructure tend to either achieve a decisive result relatively quickly, forcing rapid capitulation or regime collapse, or they settle into a very different kind of extended conflict, one focused more on territory, attrition, or economic pressure rather than continuing to target command structure specifically month after month. This war has done neither cleanly. Iran's leadership was devastated in the opening days, yet the country has continued fighting, continued retaliating across multiple countries, and continued producing new missile and drone attacks 9 months into a campaign specifically designed to prevent exactly that kind of continued coordinated resistance. That persistence, despite such extensive damage to its senior command structure, is itself one of the more remarkable and least discussed aspects of this entire war, a testament either to the resilience of Iran's broader institutional structure beneath its senior leadership, or to the sheer scale and redundancy Iran had built into its military and security apparatus long before this conflict ever began, anticipating exactly this kind of decapitation campaign might eventually be attempted against it. It's worth closing with a reminder of what all these numbers actually represent, because it's easy to let terms like military brain and command structure obscure the very real human beings behind every statistic in this story. 52 senior Iranian officials and commanders killed means 52 families who lost someone, regardless of what side of this war you find yourself sympathizing with. 18 American service members dead and hundreds more wounded means the same thing on the other side of this conflict. Every strike on a command center, every headquarters destroyed, every senior officer eliminated, exists alongside a parallel, quieter toll of grief that doesn't show up in strike counts or strategic assessments. Whatever you conclude about whether this campaign against Iran's military brain has succeeded or failed strategically, the sustained, nearly 5-month duration of this fight means that toll keeps growing week after week, with no clear sign yet of exactly when or how it finally stops climbing.